So far in our series on ledger imports, we have looked at how to use a pre-mapped import, how to correct errors that are revealed during the import process, and how to map a simple import from scratch. If you have been following along, you should be feeling quite comfortable with imports by now. In today's lesson, we're going to look at how to map a much more complicated import. The annual budget import is a very good example of a complicated import because it must be posted into multiple periods. Let's start by reviewing the process of setting up the Excel worksheet for a complicated import. Notice that this worksheet that I have set up has a column for each of the accounting periods during the year 2013. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a single worksheet, and then I'm going to import this entire file as one post, so there will be one journal when the upload is completed. Let's take a look at what we have here. I've already set up the data because this is a huge import and it would take a long time if we walked through the actual setting up of the data, so I have pre-populated this worksheet. But let's take a look at what we have here. Up here at the top, in these fields with the labels who have yellow backgrounds, we have certain information that is common for every entry in this spreadsheet. For instance, the business unit, they're all going to be posted into the test business unit. They're all going to go into budget B and so forth. We're going to give all of the separate journal lines the same transaction reference and the same description, the monthly budget. You wouldn't have to do it this way. You could add a column for the description down to the body of the worksheet if that's what you wanted. So this information that we have set up here at the top of my spreadsheet, these values are only going to be entered into the spreadsheet once, so that I don't have to set up 600 lines, for instance, with the same values for each line. Also, we have here a column for the total budget. Here in the total budget column, we have the total annual value to be posted to this particular account. We need to figure out how we want to separate that into accounting periods for the year. Some people have different weighted periods throughout the year, and if they know what those period values should be, they can go ahead and set these up so that the entry for each period more accurately reflects what actually happens in the usual practice. However, you may not know that. And what many sites do is they simply take this total for the year and then they split it into 12 equal portions. If you have a little left over after you've split the total into 12 equal portions, you can add it to one of the months throughout the year so that one month might have a different total than the rest. For instance, if we look down this sheet, take a look at August, month 8. Here in August, some of the values are not quite the same as they are throughout the rest of the year. For instance, here, for every month of the year, we have a negative 72,166 and 67 cents. But for August, there's only 63 cents. So you can dump the remainders. Anything extra that doesn't divide equally and nicely into 12 separate periods, you can dump it into one of the periods of the year. Also notice that we have set up at the header of each of these columns the transaction date for the postings to that period and the accounting period. So if you keep a template like this, then you would go in and you would change the values up here in the transaction reference and description if you needed to. And you would also change the transaction dates and the accounting periods for the year. Then you would enter whatever account codes you need to enter the budget into, and you would split up the values between the 12 months of the year. Remember that when you post the budget, this is another ledger entry, and you're hitting the account codes that have been set up in the system with business rule. So if an account is set up to require a function code, then you're going to need to be sure that you have a function code as part of your budget upload. Or if you don't want to split the budget into separate function codes, then you can put in the asterisk so that those are not analyzed in this particular budget. Another thing to remember is that if you are going to split it into separate functions or by separate org IDs or even by separate employees, if we scroll down, we should be able to find some. Here we go. So here for the luggage allowance account, this site wants to separate it by employee. So they have entered the WHO codes for those employees against the luggage account. and against the spouse travel account. So you can set up your budget so that it is broken out into the budget for each of the individual employees in that department. So any analysis codes that are required for postings to this account are also going to be required in the budget upload, because once again this is simply another ledger entry. Down at the very bottom of my spreadsheet, when I'm dealing with the transfer functions, I also need to enter the TFWW value for that transfer. So if we're transferring from Fund 10 into Fund 20, we're going to need the 20 in the TFWW field. I also need to add all the values in my spreadsheet and make sure that they come to 0, because once again this is just a regular journal entry, so the system is not going to post it if it is out of balance. Here we have 62 cents that are extra, so we're going to want to do something somewhere else in the spreadsheet in the values that we're actually going to upload to bring that value to 0. So here in accounting period 8, I have removed these 62 cents, so now my totals come to 0. I'm not going to actually upload this total value, so I can leave that the way it is, that column. Okay, so the first step is to prepare our budget in the template, the upload template. The next step, of course, is to go into Q&A Excel and select Data Send. And here we can do our mapping. I can enter the business unit code, or I can select it from the list, the test business unit for this example, or if I want to set it up as a template that can be used to upload the budget into more than one business unit, I can simply map that field to the business unit code field in our template, and I can make it an absolute value. When it's looking for the business unit during the upload process, I want the system to keep looking in field E5. I don't want it to work its way down the spreadsheet. Then I need the definition, and this is a ledger import. I'm going to need the layout identifier, which is our column P, and I'm going to assign an error cell. It can be anywhere on our spreadsheet. Then we're going to set up the first tab, the ledger import header tab, and the description I'm going to give this is just simple 2013 budget. The rest of the values should be familiar to you by now, because they are the standard values that we use in mapping a ledger import. I only want the errors to be reported because I don't want to end up with a report that has 7,000 entries, 7,000 different lines. That would be very hard to work my way through. And I need to be sure that I'm posting into the budget ledger. Okay, this information should look pretty familiar to you after having gone through our previous videos. Now I'm going to go to the ledger import details, and this is where things are slightly different than they have been in the mapping that we have done for our other imports. So I'm going to start with the first row of data, and I'm going to start with the account code, same as usual. But now I've got to go to the accounting period, and what am I going to do since I have so many different periods? I'm going to highlight each of the periods headers, and I'm going to make a range. So I want the system to work between column O and column Z. And I'm going to make this absolute. I want to make it absolute because for the first entry, I want it to come here to column O, and the second entry, I want it to go to column P, not to this next row. Now I'm going to move to the transaction date, and once again, I'm going to want to set up a range of dates. And I'm going to make it absolute. And by making this absolute, I'm telling the system to move between columns O and column Z for each of the values in the upload. Journal source, I can also make absolute because I want the system to keep coming back to this one cell. I could also hard code this data here. For instance, transaction reference, I can map it to the cell J5, or I could simply hard code this value as I have done here. By typing the value into this cell, that value is going to be posted for every line for the transaction reference. And the same holds true for the description. So if I do map it to the cell, I want that cell to be absolute because I don't want the system to work its way down my spreadsheet. We're going to ignore the base amount and the currency code here because we're going to pick that up down in the fourth currency amounts. So now I need to scroll down to where we look at the analysis. Okay, and I need to map reference to and to from who where. Now here in the fund, I can either hard code it by typing in a 10, or I can refer to this one cell and make the value absolute. Let's just hard code it. Because I know that every fund that I need for this entry is going to need to be fund 10, I can hard code it. Here I'm going to enter the function, and I'm not going to make this absolute because I want it to work down the spreadsheet. Each line might have a different function. Restriction, org ID. Okay, notice here, you have to be careful when you're mapping to be sure that when you click on the next cell, the system actually engages. So I can go back and click on that again, and I can click on the WHO code. Now, if I don't move off of this WHO code, if I now put my cursor down somewhere else, it's going to change the value in that field. That's something that you have to watch out for when you are mapping a spreadsheet. So I want this cell, and now once I have clicked in the next row in the field name portion of my upload dialog box, then it's going to save this last value that I've entered here. So I need flag and project. I'm going to pull this over and down and details. I'm not going to do anything with this totals column, so I'm just going to ignore it, and I'm going to move down to the currency code. Here again, I can either refer to the one cell up in my header, or I can just hard code the information. And now I come to the currency amounts, and here again I'm going to want a range. This time I'm not going to make the range absolute because I do want the system to work its way down the spreadsheet. And those are the fields that I need to populate to do this budget upload. As usual, I can come back here on the Options tab and I can save this as a budget import, taking the time, of course, to spell budget correctly. I could also save it as an external definition. Okay, so if I save it this way and I click OK, the next year when I do a budget import, I can call that back up and it's a pre-mapped import. So I can upload these values into Sun Systems, and then as you will remember, we go into Sun Systems and we run the ledger import from the control desk. And that's all there really is to doing a budget upload all in one journal. Other people who apparently don't mind running budget uploads might actually run 12 different journals to account for each of the accounting periods in the year. However, you can do it all at once. And it's actually fairly simple once you get the hang of it. And here's the proof that this budget actually was successfully uploaded into the system. What I did is I ran a detailed report, or you could look at the journal listing as well. And I looked up this particular journal, and here are all of our different account codes with their postings into separate periods using a relevant transaction date for each of the entries. And over here, if we scroll to the right, we see that the analysis code came in, as did the currency code and the various values. This 15 over here, if you notice, that is the journal number. So here is our upload. Thank you so much for coming with me as we explored a simple way to upload a year's worth of budget in one simple process.